pull up a chair, get something warm in your hands. If it's a hug mug, even better. I'm not above judging your mug choice, but I'll do it kindly. I'm Jodie Walkerling. I work with people who tried everything they could and still ended up repeating the thing they swore they'd never repeat. It turns out doing everything right was never the variable. It was never the recipe pumpkin. It was the kitchen. The mother wound is not about your mother. It's not about a person. It's not about gender. It's about the first physical environment your nervous system ever lived inside. The biological container that was built around you before you had words, before you had a self. Back when you were basically a very small, very absorbent sponge, quietly absorbing an architecture you never agreed to. And here's the double bind. That container is still dictating how much life you're allowed to hold. You've likely been running on an unagreed operating system for decades. And nobody handed you the manual because nobody knew there was one. That ends now. This is Mend the Mother Wound. When people hear mother wound, they do the obvious thing. They immediately think about their mother, their actual mother, the woman who raised them or didn't. And that's not unreasonable. The word is right there in the name. But that assumption that the mother wound is about your mother is the very thing that keeps people stuck. Because here's what I found. The mother wound is a pre-identity injury. It was formed before you had self-developed enough to understand what was happening, before you had the cognitive architecture to evaluate what was being installed. The mother in mother wound is not a person. It's the first biological container your nervous system ever knew. It's the environment where your biology began. It's the architecture that was handed to you before you could say yes or no. And here's why that distinction mattered. If the mother wound is about your mother, the person, then healing becomes relational. It becomes about having a conversation, setting a boundary, getting closure, creating a situation where they are easier to deal with, or so one would think. Writing a letter, having that difficult talk at Christmas lunch that nobody wanted. And all of those things might be useful, but they won't heal the wound, because the wound isn't in the relationship. The wound is in the architecture that was installed before the relationship was even a thing you could name. You were learning what was safe to feel before you knew what feelings were. You were learning who you were allowed to be before you had a self. That's not a conversation you fix at Christmas lunch, New Year's Eve dinner, or heaven forbid, on Mother's or Father's Day. That's an operating system. You have to recognize, name, and choose to stop running. The mother wound didn't pick a side. It didn't need to. It just handed you a set of blueprints and said, this is how the building works. And you, being a very small, very absorbent sponge, you took those blueprints as reality. Because what else were you going to do? You were two. You were set. That's the architecture. That's the installation. And that's where we start. So you grow up. You leave the house. You build a life. You're competent. You're functional. People may describe you as someone who has their act together, and yet there's something, a constriction, a ceiling you keep hitting that you can't explain. For some people, it shows up as hyper-independence. You cannot ask for help, you cannot receive care. The idea of someone holding space for you feels physically uncomfortable. Not because you don't want it, but because your nervous system never learnt that receiving it was safe. That's not a personality trait. That's the container talking. For others, it shows up as the glass ceiling effect. You get to a certain level in your career, your relationships, in your ambitions, in your capacity for joy, and then you stop. Something invisible says, that's enough, that's as much as you get, and you comply without ever noticing you complied. You think it's imposter syndrome. You think it's self-sabotage. You think it's a problem with your confidence or your mindset. It's not, it's the container. The container had a limit programmed into it before you had words. You didn't set that ceiling. You just kept bumping your head on it and wondering why the room felt small. Here's what familiar often trumps healthy looks like in adult life. You'll choose the partner who feels like home, even if home wasn't safe. You'll recreate the dynamic you swore you'd never recreate because your nervous system doesn't recognize healthy. It recognizes familiar. And familiar feels like survival. Familiar feels like the thing that got you through. That double bind, the thing you're trying to escape, is the thing your body keeps steering towards. That's not a flaw in your character. That's the unagreed operating system running the show from behind the walls. You've probably been wondering why the same things keep happening. Different partner, different job, different city, different coach, same outcome. It was never the recipe, it was always the kitchen. This is the cognitive blind spot. You can't think your way out of a biological wound. The container was installed before you had words, before you had the cognitive architecture to evaluate what was being handed to you. That's the double bind. You've been trying to use the very instrument that was shaped inside the container to escape the container. It doesn't work that way. What you can do, and this is where everything shifts, is recognize the zombie script while it's running. The zombie script is the thing that activates before your conscious mind even registers what's happening. It's the reflex that flares up when someone offers you genuine care and you feel a wall go up. It's the constriction in your chest when something good happens and you immediately start waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's the voice that says, don't get too comfortable, don't get too big, don't take up too much space. That's not your voice, that's the script. And it's been running since before you had a self developed enough to question it. The moment you feel that familiar constriction, the glass ceiling on your own capacity, the urge to reject help, the reflex to shrink back from something good, you pause and you name it out loud if nobody's watching. You say, this isn't my architecture. This is the container I was handed before I had a self strong enough to say no. That pause between the constriction and the old reaction, that's where expansion lives. You're not doing a breathing exercise, you're not lighting a candle and hoping for the best. You're not performing healing, you're recognizing. And recognition is what creates the decision point. The decision point is what creates the possibility of something different. That's where you stop running the unagreed operating system and start writing your own. You're not fixing a person, you're closing down a program that was installed before you had any say in the matter. It was never the recipe, it was the kitchen. And you can build a different one. Now, before you go, let me tell you what we don't do here. We don't do IFS and parts language. I've got enough parts of myself to deal with without introducing them to each other at a dinner party. We don't do the acronym soup. CBT, ACT, DBT. It's like alphabet spaghetti. Nobody's finishing that bowl and nobody should have to. And we're definitely not going to sit here tapping ourselves like a bongo and calling it EFT. I've got a body, not a drum kit, and it's not going on tour. We look at the architecture underneath, not your personality, not your parts. The pieces installed before you even had words, back when you were basically a very small, very absorbent sponge, still quietly running the show from somewhere behind the walls. No candles, no crystals, no chakra alignments, no 52 dimensions, no incense pretending to be a personality trait. Just your truth, surfaced, facilitated warmly, in a mug you didn't have to buy from someone's healing collection. You didn't choose the wound. You can choose where it ends. And if that's the work you're here for, subscribe. Every week we go one layer deeper into the architecture. Bring the mug. I already told you which one.